A tough, no-nonsense black woman steps into a mansion full of chaos, grief, and two spoiled kids who've scared off every nanny in town. She's got no fancy degrees, no time for nonsense, but a heart full of grit. When privilege throws shade and the past comes back swinging, she doesn't break. She makes the house better. One meal, one meltdown, one miracle at a time. If resilience had a face, it'd be hers. Where are you watching from? And did she win your heart yet? It was 7:15 on a Wednesday morning, and Vincent Dixon, CEO of Dixon Infrastructure Group and winner of last year's Best Dressed Executive Under 50, looked like a man who had lost a bet with life. His crisp white shirt was splattered with orange juice and a streak of something suspiciously yellow. His tie was missing in action, and his perfectly polished loafers had been replaced by mismatched socks, one blue, one gray. Somewhere in the kitchen behind him, the smoke detector was pleading for mercy as a forgotten slice of toast turned into charcoal. He clutched a spatula like it was a weapon in a war he was clearly losing. The blender had just made a noise that sounded like a dying animal, and a trail of cereal flakes led from the counter to the floor, forming a kind of breadcrumb path of defeat. Vincent wiped his forehead with a dish rag that also had ketchup on it, though he didn't remember making anything with ketchup. "Breakfast is ready," he called out toward the hallway, his voice hopeful, bordering on desperate. No response, only silence. And then footsteps. Not normal footsteps, but the kind that come with rhythm drama and unnecessary volume. Thump, thump, thump. From around the corner came Ariel Dixon, 9 years old, wearing a bathrobe like it was a royal cape and a pair of glittery sunglasses pushed up on her head. She had the energy of someone preparing for a press conference and the expression of a girl deeply unimpressed with the state of her world. Behind her came Asher Dixon, 6 years old, clutching a stuffed dinosaur by the leg and dragging one sneaker behind him like a prisoner being escorted to trial. His hair stood up on one side like it had refused to obey orders. "I want waffles," Ariel announced, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The square kind, not the round ones. Round waffles feel lazy." Vincent blinked. "There are no waffles. There are scrambled eggs and toast and juice, just like yesterday." Ariel's eyes narrowed. "But yesterday you said today was a new day." Before Vincent could respond, Asher jumped in. "The eggs look like brains," he exclaimed, poking them with a spoon. Gross Vincent sighed, deeply, from his soul. "You two," he said, dropping the spatula on the counter, "are the reason we no longer have a housekeeper, a nanny, or any furniture in the guest room." Asher looked up confused. "Why the guest room?" "Because the last nanny locked herself in there and refused to come out until I bought her a plane ticket to Arizona," Vincent muttered. Ariel took a bite of toast, chewed once, then dramatically spit it into a napkin. "Daddy, I love you, but this tastes like regret." Vincent gave up and sat down at the edge of a bar stool, staring blankly at the stove. For a man who managed billion-dollar projects, negotiated international contracts, and had 3 degrees, including an MBA from Yale, he had never felt more defeated than in this moment. The kitchen was chaos. The kids were chaos. His life, since his wife passed away 3 years ago, had been trying to balance grief, guilt, and 2 rapidly evolving small humans who seemed to conspire daily to test the limits of his sanity. He loved them desperately. But love didn't come with a manual, especially when it came to brushing long curly hair at 6 in the morning or explaining why Asher couldn't wear his Spider-Man costume to school for the 5th day in a row. And the house. The house looked like a furniture catalog married a toy store, and they both filed for divorce. As he sat there, elbows on knees, Vincent heard the familiar tap of heels. Laura, his assistant/lifesaver, appeared at the doorway, iPad in one hand and judgment in her eyes. "You're not in the office yet," she said flatly. Vincent gave her a look. "I was delayed," he said, "by waffles." Laura glanced at the kids. Ariel was now critiquing the placement of fruit in her juice glass. Asher was pouring syrup directly onto his napkin. She nodded slowly. "Right. Waffles." Vincent stood up and straightened his shirt, then immediately gave up on trying to fix it. "I need help, Laura. Not another agency clone. Someone real. Someone who doesn't think kids are accessories. Someone who doesn't run at the first insult." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying your children are difficult?" "I'm saying," Vincent replied, rubbing his temple, "that if we were in medieval times, they would have been banished to a tower by now." Laura smirked. "I might know someone, but she's not your typical candidate." Vincent nodded quickly. "Perfect. Send her. Today." "I haven't even asked her yet." Laura replied. Vincent stared at her. "Bribe her, lie to her, offer her my Tesla. I don't care. I just He paused, lowering his voice as Ariel began making a sculpture out of butter packets. "I just need someone who can survive them. And maybe help them. I don't know. Not destroy every adult who walks through this door." Laura tapped a note into her tablet. "I'll call her." As she left, Vincent looked around the kitchen. The eggs were still on the stove. The toast was now cold. Ariel was now rearranging the fruit bowl in alphabetical order, and Asher was trying to feed the syrup-covered napkin to the dog. Vincent sighed again. He didn't want a babysitter. He didn't want a maid. He needed a miracle. And somewhere across the city, that miracle had just burned her last pot of boiled yams and was sitting on the edge of her bed, wondering if life still had room for someone like her. But that, of course, is another part of the story. Across the city, while Vincent Dixon was losing a war with breakfast, Clara Jones was sitting on the edge of a creaky twin mattress in a house that had long stopped feeling like home. The morning light slanted through the broken blinds, striping her tired face as she held a chipped mug filled with weak instant coffee. She wasn't drinking it. She was just holding it like something solid to keep her hands from shaking. In the silence of that cramped bedroom layered with old paint and older resentments, Clara looked at the wall in front of her as if it might offer some kind of answer. The fan above her spun with a low mechanical moan, barely moving the air that smelled faintly of bleach and fried onions. Her back ached, not from age but from carrying the weight of a life that had slowly folded in on itself. She used to wear tailored suits, used to walk the polished halls of the city planning department where people stood when she entered a room. Her name meant something. Clara Jones was the woman who got things done. Now she couldn't get her mother-in-law to say good morning. Her husband Darren barely spoke to her unless it was to ask what she did all day or remind her again that he could have married someone else, someone with better genes. Clara never responded to that. She just nodded like it didn't slice through her and kept folding laundry, kept cooking meals she wasn't thanked for, kept brushing her teeth next to a man who hadn't kissed her in years. This morning was no different. She had woken up early like always to prepare breakfast. She had laid out the same table setting, poured the juice, and fried the eggs just the way Darren liked. He came in, grunted something about the news being too loud, took 2 bites, and left his plate half full. His mother, Miss Irene, walked in moments later with a face that suggested the eggs had insulted her. She sniffed, pushed her plate away without tasting it, and said, "You know, back in my day, a woman who couldn't bear children didn't sit around pretending to be a wife." She left. Clara had said nothing. She picked up the plates, her eyes stinging, not from the smoke, but from the words. It wasn't new. That line or some version of it came at least twice a week. Sometimes 3, depending on whether Miss Irene's favorite gospel show had aired the night before. Clara knew she wasn't wanted. She knew she had outlived her usefulness. And yet she stayed. Because where would she go? Her parents had passed. Her siblings were scattered and struggling. And her friends, well, most had stopped calling after she left her job. Except one, Laura. Laura had been her rock since college. They had gone through bad dates, late-night study marathons, and first apartments with moldy ceilings together. Now, Laura was a sharp-dressed executive assistant with her life seemingly in perfect order. She texted every week, checked in, sent memes and motivational quotes Clara often didn't open. But this morning, Laura called. "Hey, babe, quick question. Are you still looking for something? Anything to get out of that house?" Clara blinked, her body still in the kitchen, but her mind already halfway down a road she hadn't dared to imagine. Yes. God, yes. Laura's voice dropped into a whisper, like she was sharing top-secret information. "Okay, my boss, Vincent Dixon, the guy I work for, he has 2 kids and no nanny. He's drowning. He's offering real money. But Clara, these kids are baby tornadoes with trust issues. They don't like anyone. I told him you might be different. You interested." Clara felt something shift in her chest. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding released all at once. "When do I start? Let me talk to him. He's desperate but also picky. I'll call you back in an hour." An hour passed like molasses. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her hands clasped, staring at the cracked tile floor, while Miss Irene muttered in the background about something on the news. She ignored her. For once, Clara wasn't trapped in the sound of that voice. Her mind was someplace else, picturing a new space, a new job, a chance to feel needed again. When Laura called back, Clara's heart thudded like she was about to go on stage. "You're in. He wants to meet you tomorrow. Bring something simple. Be honest. Be you." Clara stood up and walked to the tiny bedroom she shared with a man who no longer saw her. She opened the closet, slowly picked out her best blouse, a pale blue cotton shirt with pearl buttons, and laid it on the bed. Her hands shook as she smoothed it. She hadn't felt hope in a long time, and it terrified her. That night she didn't sleep. She ironed the shirt 3 times, cleaned her shoes until they reflected the light bulb overhead, and packed a small purse with a pen, a notebook, and a pack of gum. At 2 in the morning, she sat by the window, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, wondering what would happen if she failed again. She wasn't young. She didn't have the patience of a 22-year-old or the energy of a gym instructor. But she had love. She had discipline. She had experience. And more than anything, she had a heart that still wanted to nurture. The next morning, she stood at the mirror and told herself quietly, "You are still you. You are still enough." Darren didn't look up from his phone when she told him she was going for an interview. He just nodded, barely listening, before saying, "Don't embarrass yourself. It's a nanny job, not the Senate." Clara walked out the door without responding. Her palms were sweaty. Her steps were uncertain. But her heart, though fragile, was finally moving forward. And across the city, 2 kids were busy pouring syrup on toast and rejecting anything that looked like responsibility. And one man was drinking cold coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest dad," wondering if maybe, just maybe today would be the day someone walked into their house and changed everything. Clara arrived 15 minutes early. She always did for things that mattered. Standing outside the Dixon Corporation headquarters, a towering glass building that looked like it had been carved out of ambition and polished with success, she checked her reflection in the revolving door one last time. Her blouse was crisp, her slacks freshly pressed, and her edges slicked back neatly. The morning air was cool, but sweat lined her palms. As she took a deep breath and stepped into the lobby, the scent of expensive cologne leather and fresh espresso washed over her. Everything in the building whispered efficiency and power, from the marble floors to the brushed steel elevator doors. Clara held her purse a little tighter. The security desk was manned by a man in his 30s, tall, clean-shaven, with a name badge that said Morris. He looked at Clara with a neutral face that didn't stay neutral for long. His eyes flicked down to her bag, her shoes, her skin. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, polite but clipped. Clara cleared her throat. "I'm here to see Mr. Dixon. I have an appointment. His assistant Laura scheduled it." Morris gave a tight nod but didn't reach for the sign-in sheet immediately. Instead, he asked, "Do you have ID?" Clara blinked. She had been in offices like this before. She knew how these things worked, but there was something about the way he said it, not cautious, not professional, but as if he was double-checking something that didn't look quite right. Clara handed over her ID and waited while he stared at it a beat too long. Finally, he gave her a visitor badge. "Take the elevator to the top floor. Laura will meet you." Laura was waiting near the reception desk, already in motion, smiling, but speaking fast like someone on a clock. "You look great. I told him you were coming. Be yourself, but remember he's Vincent. Just breathe. Don't let his silence throw you off. He always interviews like he's running a Fortune 500 acquisition." They reached the door, and Laura knocked twice before easing it open. Vincent Dixon didn't look up from his laptop. The room was spacious, filled with natural light and modern furniture. One entire wall was glass, offering a sweeping view of the city below. The man behind the desk was dressed in tailored navy sleeves, rolled up glasses low on his nose. He was typing. "Come in. Sit wherever," he said without looking. Clara took a seat in the chair across from his desk and waited. Her hands rested on her lap, her shoulders pulled back, but her stomach twisted. She watched as Vincent clicked something on his screen, shut the laptop, and finally looked up. His face was handsome, but tired. There were faint bags under his eyes and a furrow in his brow that looked permanent. "So you're Clara Jones," he said, folding his arms. "Laura says you're reliable. I hope she's right. I've gone through 5 nannies in 2 years. 2 quit after the first week. 1 left during lunch." Clara nodded slowly. "I understand. Do you have formal training in childcare, degrees, certification, CPR?" "No degrees," Clara said steady, "but I have 20 years of experience raising my younger siblings. I've taught Sunday school for most of my adult life, and I know how to connect with kids who have big feelings." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Big feelings?" "Yes," Clara said. "Children process grief and fear in ways that don't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like misbehavior." He paused. That caught his attention. Clara saw it, the small shift in his posture, the slight lift of one brow. It wasn't approval. Not yet. But it was interest. Tell me how you'd handle two kids who refuse to eat, hit each other, and lie to make adults fight. I'd listen first, then I'd set rules, not harsh ones, just clear. I'd show up every day the same way until they trusted me enough to believe I'm not leaving. Kids like that don't need perfection, they need consistency. Vincent leaned back in his chair and exhaled. He tapped his fingers on the desk. The job pays $500 a week, room and board included. First month is probation. If you leave, no partial pay. If you stay, contract extends. Fair. Clara nodded. Yes, that's fair. You start Monday. Laura will send the paperwork. My kids don't take to people. Don't expect hugs. Don't try too hard. Just keep them alive. And don't let them burn the house down. Clara stood smoothing her slacks. Thank you for the opportunity. As she left the office, Vincent watched her go. He didn't say anything, but he made a mental note. She had guts. He wasn't sure she had a chance in hell, but she had guts. Monday came with rain. A soft drizzle painted the sidewalks and turned the Dixon Estates driveway into a mirror. Clara stepped out of the taxi and stared up at the house. It was massive white stone, all sharp angles and polished windows. She clutched her small bag and walked to the front door. Laura had already told her she'd be let in by the housekeeper. The door creaked open. A woman in her 50s with quick eyes and a pinched mouth looked her up and down. "You must be the new nanny," she said flatly. "Come in." They're in the playroom. Clara thanked her and stepped inside. The house was silent except for the faint sound of cartoons coming from upstairs. Clara followed the sound, her heart in her throat. She reached the playroom and stood in the doorway. Two children sat on beanbags' iPads, glowing in their small hands. The girl Ariel looked up first. She had a head full of curls and eyes that said she was used to being disappointed. Her expression didn't change. She glanced at her brother Asher, who didn't even look up. Clara smiled gently. "Hi, I'm Clara. I'll be helping out around here." Neither child responded. Asher paused his game and finally glanced her way. "How long are you staying?" he asked, voice flat. "Hopefully a while," Clara said. "But that depends on how things go." Ariel tilted her head. "They all say that." Clara walked further into the room and sat in the chair by the wall. She didn't try to touch anything, didn't try to make them talk. She just sat, present, quiet, watchful. Upstairs, Vincent stood at the top of the staircase, mug of coffee in hand. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see Clara through the railing. She wasn't forcing anything. She wasn't performing. She just was. He sighed. "Let's see how long she lasts." And downstairs, Clara smiled to herself as Asher peeked at her from behind his screen, just for a second. It wasn't much, but it was something. The morning after Clara officially started her job at the Dixon household arrived like a quiet warning. The house stood still when she stepped in through the side entrance, just as Laura had instructed. It was just past 6, and the sky outside was still waking up. The mansion's long marble hallway echoed with the soft tapping of her flat shoes. She paused to take a breath, adjusted the blue sweater she wore over her plain collared shirt, and whispered to herself, "Just be kind. Just be calm." The kitchen was massive, far larger than any she'd worked in before, filled with brushed steel appliances that gleamed like they'd never been touched. Clara placed her bag neatly in the pantry corner and washed her hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this meal this morning would be the first real test. She'd done this before. She'd cooked for church groups of 50. She'd fed babies who cried through dinner. But nothing ever quite prepared her for feeding children who didn't want her there. She made eggs with care, not too runny, not too firm. She set up toast just right, lightly golden, no burnt edges. She even cut the fruit into fun little shapes, stars and moons and hearts, hoping maybe the smallest gesture might spark a smile. By 7, everything was set. The table looked perfect. She looked at it once, then again, as if trying to see it through a child's eyes. Footsteps approached, light but fast, then a pair of heavier ones. The sisters came in still in their pajamas, Ariel in a silky purple robe with her hair in 2 perfect braids, Asher trailing behind her in a dinosaur onesie, eyes barely open. They didn't say hello. Clara greeted them anyway. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Hi there, Asher. Breakfast is ready." Ariel's eyes went to the table, scanned it quickly, then turned back to Clara with a face that would have made most grown-ups flinch. "Did you put cheese in the eggs?" Clara blinked, then smiled gently. No, I used just a little almond milk and salt like Laura said you liked. Ariel didn't respond. She sat down with a dramatic sigh, pulling out her chair like it had wronged her. Asher followed, not speaking, just staring. Clara stood back, watching them take their first bites. Ariel tasted the egg and dropped her fork with a sharp clatter. "This tastes like jail food," she declared. Asher nodded. "Yeah, like the school cafeteria, but sadder." Clara held her smile, but her hands tightened a little behind her back. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe you can tell me what you'd like tomorrow, and we'll try again." Ariel squinted at her like she'd been challenged. "You won't be here tomorrow." "They never are." Asher giggled and whispered, "Let's make a bet." They didn't whisper low enough. Clara crouched to pick up a napkin that had fallen, gave herself a second to breathe, then stood back up. "I don't plan to leave unless you chase me out," she said softly, meeting their gaze with calm. "And even then, I might just chase you right back." Ariel looked confused, like she hadn't expected a comeback that didn't involve shouting or tears. She narrowed her eyes, then quietly pushed her plate away. "Not hungry." Asher poured his milk onto the floor. Clara paused, stared at the mess for 2 long seconds, then reached for a towel. "I guess your imaginary fish needed breakfast too," she said without anger. The sisters exchanged glances, unsure what to make of that. Clara cleaned the floor in silence, not speaking, not scolding. When she looked up again, she smiled, not in mockery, but with an exhaustion she hid well. Vincent, who'd been watching from the staircase above, shook his head slightly. He had heard every word, every clang of a fork, and every complaint. He leaned on the banister, sipping his black coffee, slowly trying not to interfere, but wondering how long she would last. Every other nanny either cried, yelled, or left by noon. But Clara was different. She didn't ask for respect. She acted like she already had it. Later that morning, as the kids disappeared upstairs and the house fell into a strange quiet, Clara stood at the sink, rinsing the last plate. Her hands were steady again, though her back ached. She allowed herself a few minutes to stand by the window. The sun had fully risen, but the warmth hadn't quite reached her yet. She pulled out a small cloth from her pocket and dabbed her forehead. The towel was old, soft, from years of use, faded pink, with a tiny sewn-in flower that had come unraveled. She stared outside, watching birds peck at the feeder by the garden fence. Her lips parted slightly, as if whispering something to herself, maybe a prayer, maybe just breathing out everything she hadn't said. It was the first time in a long while that she wasn't boiling water for someone else's bath or defending herself from her mother-in-law's tongue. Her peace didn't last long. A loud crash came from upstairs, then shouting, "Give it back, Asher. It's mine. You stole it from my desk." "I had it first," Daddy said. "No, he didn't." Clara wiped her hands and headed up quickly. She didn't run. She didn't panic. But her steps were quick, firm, familiar with the sound of war between siblings. She found them in the hallway, wrestling over a tablet. Ariel had one sock on hair frizzed from stress, while Asher clutched the device like a shield. Okay, Clara said gently. "Let's freeze." Nobody wins a fight by yelling. They paused, just a little. She knelt, looked at both of them evenly. "Tell me what's going on, one at a time." Asher huffed. "I was playing with the race car game." Ariel took it and said I was hogging it. Ariel folded her arms. "He's lying. He was watching weird slime videos and wouldn't let me have a turn. That tablet is mine anyway." Clara looked at both of them. "You know what I think it belongs to your father. Let's take it downstairs and put it on the shelf for now. We can set a timer later so everyone gets a turn." Asher opened his mouth to protest, but Clara gently placed her hand on the tablet. "No negotiations today, just fairness." To her surprise, they didn't fight it. Ariel rolled her eyes, but let go. Asher muttered something under his breath, but followed her downstairs. As they returned to the living room, Vincent was walking toward the front door with his phone in hand. He stopped and looked at Clara, then at the kids. "Everything all right?" he asked. Clara gave a small nod. "Just a disagreement. It's sorted." He looked at her for a second longer than needed, then gave a slight nod. "Let me know if they give you too much trouble." "They haven't yet," Clara said, then added, "They're just learning how far they can go." Vincent didn't smile, but something behind his eyes shifted. He turned and walked out. Back inside, Clara sat on the couch. The tablet now rested on the high shelf, out of reach. She exhaled. The day wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she had survived the first half. And, more importantly, so had the children, with fewer tears than usual, maybe a little less chaos than the day before. From the stairs, Ariel peeked down, watching Clara silently, then retreated. Not in fear, but in thought. Something about this one was different, and somewhere in the quiet space between tantrums and toast, that difference was starting to matter. If someone had told Clara that her first real breakthrough with the Dixon kids would come not through warmth, but through strategy, she wouldn't have believed them. But on that quiet Thursday afternoon, after wiping syrup off the dining chairs for the third time, she sat in the living room with a cool glass of lemonade and a plan. A plan born not from frustration, but from watching, learning, and understanding two very intelligent, very lonely children who had been allowed to run free for far too long. Ariel and Asher weren't bad kids. They were just unmoored like little boats without anchors. Clara wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to plead. She was going to disrupt their little kingdom just enough to show them what life looked like without their tiny thrones. So as they napped upstairs after school, she quietly gathered every toy, every screen, every electronic distraction they owned, wrapped them in a spare blanket, zipped it up, and shoved it under Asher's bed. She even left their room, looking suspiciously untouched. That evening, when the kids bounced upstairs after dinner, their shrieks of panic echoed through the house like a fire alarm. Clara kept her face neutral as they came charging downstairs. "Miss Clara," Ariel shouted, hair a mess, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with fear. "My iPad is gone, my pink journal, my unicorn stickers, everything. Someone stole my Switch and my race car." Asher wailed, clutching his chest like he'd lost a limb. Clara put down her magazine slowly, deliberately. "Stolen, are you sure?" Her voice was calm, maybe too calm. "Yes!" they yelled in unison. She raised an eyebrow. "Where did you leave them?" "In our room, duh," Ariel snapped, then blinked, realizing her tone. Clara leaned back. That's serious. Maybe someone snuck in while I was asleep on the couch." She pulled out her phone. "Should I call the police?" Asher nodded solemnly. "Call them. This is an emergency." Clara pretended to dial, even walking into the hallway for effect. "Yes, officer. I'm reporting stolen property. Yes, children's electronics. Yes, they are very upset. Next week? Oh, I understand. Thank you." She walked back, sighing. "They said they're too busy. Can send someone next week." Ariel gasped. "Next week, but I can't sleep without Mr. Wiggly." Clara clapped her hands together gently. "Then we have a problem. Or maybe a challenge." The kids watched her warily. Asher narrowed his eyes. "What kind of challenge?" "I will help you look for your toys," Clara said, her voice softening. "But I need something from you too." "Like what?" Ariel folded her arms. "Respect," Clara said. "No more shouting, no more making messes for fun, no more skipping meals. You treat me the way you want to be treated, and in return, I treat your belongings like they matter." "Deal?" There was a beat. Then Asher looked at Ariel. Ariel rolled her eyes, but not out of annoyance. More like she knew Clara wasn't bluffing. "Deal," she said finally. "Deal," Asher echoed. They searched the whole house. 2 hours. Under beds, behind couches, even in the freezer. Clara kept the energy light playful. They laughed. They teased. They bonded. When she finally found the missing bundle under the bed, their faces lit up like Christmas morning. "You saved them!" Ariel shrieked. "Maybe you just didn't look hard enough the first time," Clara said with a wink. That night, something shifted. It wasn't huge, but it was real. Ariel sat next to Clara during her evening tea and asked about her favorite colors. Asher brought her a drawing of what he called Super Clara fighting off monsters. She nearly cried. She didn't, but she nearly did. Upstairs, Vincent had seen everything. Not the entire plan, but enough to recognize that something had changed. He stood behind the staircase, arms crossed, coffee going cold in his hands. Clara had done in days what 15 nannies before her couldn't accomplish in months. His kids were behaving not perfectly, but better. They were smiling. Not just loud, bratty grins, but real smiles. Honest ones. Laura noticed it too. That Friday afternoon, while organizing Vincent's schedule, she leaned over and whispered, "She's a keeper." Vincent nodded slowly. "Yeah, she might be." But that wasn't the only thing on his mind. There had been whispers. 2 board members had made offhand comments about Clara's presence at his home. One had even asked, not kindly, whether it was a good look to have someone like her working so closely with his kids. Vincent hadn't responded. Not yet. But the anger sat under his skin like fire. Clara didn't know not yet. He hadn't told her. He didn't want to ruin her focus, her momentum. Still, the world outside their home was not as kind as the one she was slowly building within it. That weekend, Clara took the kids to the park. Ariel held her hand the whole time. Asher made her push him on the swing until her arms ached. A few moms stared. One even approached. "Are you their nanny?" she asked, trying to smile but failing. "Yes," Clara said simply. "Oh," the woman replied. "That's lovely. You know, it's so nice to see someone like you with such well-behaved kids." Clara didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She just nodded, smiled, and walked away. That night, she wrote in her journal, "They're changing, slowly but surely, and so am I." She didn't know Vincent had read that line the next morning when he was searching for his charger and stumbled upon the open notebook. He closed it gently, said nothing, but the words stayed with him all day. He found himself defending her subtly in meetings, emphasizing the children's progress at home as a reason for his improved focus. When someone asked if she was a permanent solution, he answered without hesitation, "She's the reason I make it to work with my mind still intact. That's all that matters." Vincent wasn't perfect, but he was paying attention. Clara didn't need a savior. She just needed a chance. And for the first time in years, it felt like the right people were finally beginning to see that. One of Clara's silk scarves lay torn on the floor, Ariel's doing. But Clara didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just stood there silent, as if something inside her had quietly unraveled along with the fabric. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, not in anger, but in restraint. It wasn't the first time a child had lashed out at her, but it was the first time it stung like this, because Clara had started to care. Deeply. Ariel stood by the couch, arms crossed tight over her chest, defiant but shaken. She didn't look away, but her breathing was shallow. Clara met her gaze, not with punishment, but with a strange, aching patience. "You're mad," Ariel said, trying to sound bored, but her voice trembled. Clara stepped forward slowly, crouched to pick up the scarf, brushed the fringe delicately into her palm. "I'm not mad," she said quietly, "but that one was special to me." "Then why didn't you stop me?" Ariel's voice cracked. "Why didn't you yell like the others?" Clara folded the ruined scarf gently and stood upright. "Because yelling doesn't fix broken things. And you looked like you were the one about to fall apart." Ariel blinked fast and turned away. It was quiet for a few moments before she asked almost accusingly, "Why don't you have your own kids?" The question hit harder than the torn scarf ever could. Clara didn't answer right away. Her lips parted, then closed. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to hush the air around them. "Because sometimes God doesn't give you the gift you hoped for," she said, setting the scarf down. "So you try to become a gift for someone else." Ariel didn't say anything, but her shoulders dropped just a little, like something heavy had shifted inside her. Vincent noticed the shift too. Over the past few weeks, something in his house had changed, and not just the kids' behavior. They were lighter, calmer. But more than that, Vincent caught himself watching Clara when she didn't know he was near. The way she tied Asher's shoes, whispering something silly to make him smile. The way she let Ariel braid her hair while pretending not to notice how careful the girl was being. And it was working. Mornings weren't war zones anymore. Bedtime didn't require negotiations. But not everyone was as convinced. At a client dinner that week, Vincent had just finished presenting a new sustainability proposal when a man across the table raised a glass and said, "Dixon heard you've got a new hire at home. That woman in the photo going around. Pretty brave of you." Vincent's hand froze around his fork. "Brave," the man chuckled. "Well, bringing someone like that into your home. Not exactly what most would expect, but I guess that's your style." Vincent looked down at his plate. He felt a sharp burn in his chest, but said nothing. Later in the parking lot, one of his colleagues tried to soften the blow. "People just talk, you know. A CEO, divorced 2 young kids, and a live-in nanny who doesn't exactly blend in." Vincent turned. "She's not a story. She's a person." But the seed had been planted. The next day, during a meeting, one board member asked outright, "Vincent, you're launching a campaign on equity and representation, and yet the optics at home, well, frankly, some of the donors have expressed concerns." Vincent clenched his jaw. "Are we evaluating childcare now in board meetings? Only when it reflects on the brand," the woman replied. That night, Vincent came home tense. He didn't say much during dinner. Clara could sense something had shifted in him, too. She cleaned, quietly tucked Asher in with his favorite story and sat beside Ariel, braiding her hair while the girl rambled about a school project. After lights out, she returned downstairs. Vincent was standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge like he'd forgotten why he opened it. "You all right?" Clara asked. He nodded slowly, then turned. "Can I ask you something personal?" She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You can ask." "Why do you stay?" he asked. "After everything. The judgment, the comments. People assume things, ugly things." Clara held his gaze. "Because I've been through worse. Because your kids are worth it. And because I made a promise to myself a long time ago that I wouldn't run every time the world made me feel small." Vincent exhaled, something unspoken passing between them. Then he stepped aside. "There's tea in the cabinet. I'm going to bed." But he didn't sleep, because even though the house was quiet, his mind was loud. And downstairs, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug and a scarf in her lap, stitching it back together with tiny, careful movements, thread by thread, like someone who believed even broken things could still be beautiful. It started with a photo. Not a professional photo, not even a good one. Grainy, slightly tilted, taken from a distance through a line of bushes. But it captured something intimate. Clara Jones kneeling in the grass, arms wrapped gently around Asher Dixon, his small face buried in her shoulder, her eyes closed as if offering all the steadiness she had left. It wasn't new. Clara had comforted the children many times in the last few weeks, but this time someone had been watching. Someone with a phone. Someone with a motive. By the time Vincent returned from a board meeting, the photo had made its way across social media. It began with a post on a suburban parent Facebook group. Then it got picked up by a gossip blog. Within hours, it had found a spot on 2 national entertainment sites. The headlines weren't factual. They were crafted to sting. CEO Dixon hires alternative mother figure for kids who is the woman living in his home, or worse. From maid to matriarch, Vincent Dixon's bold family choice raises eyebrows. In the Dixon household, the first to find out wasn't Vincent. It was Laura, who stormed into his office with her phone in hand and her voice sharp. "You need to see this now." Vincent took one look, his jaw tightening. Where was this taken? The park. Yesterday. Some parent must have snapped it. He stood slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The air around him turned cold. Is Clara aware? No. And don't let her find out through a headline. You need to tell her. He nodded once. "Get the kids. Bring them home early. Keep them off devices. I'll handle Clara." Downstairs, Clara was folding laundry when Vincent found her. She looked up, smiled softly, then noticed the look on his face. She stood straight shoulders, instinctively bracing for bad news. "Something happened," she said. "Yes, sit down." She sat slowly, the warmth in her face replaced by caution. Vincent handed her his phone, already open to the article. Clara read silently. Her hand went to her chest as she absorbed each line. When she reached the part that speculated about her relationship with the family, she flinched. "They think." Vincent spoke low. "They want a story. They don't care if it's true." Clara set the phone down, exhaling through her nose. "I need to go. This isn't good for the kids. Or for you." "No, you're not going anywhere." "Vincent." "Clara, look at me. You didn't do anything wrong. Those kids are thriving because of you. I won't let a headline decide what happens inside my house." Her voice cracked. "But outside your house, the world thinks I'm some charity case who wormed her way in." Vincent sat beside her. "Then we show them who you really are." She turned away. "You don't know how fast this kind of thing spreads. How hard it is to shake off once people decide what they see when they look at me." He didn't argue. He let the silence speak. Because she was right. The next day, the backlash reached the boardroom. An emergency meeting was called. Vincent walked in late, sleeves rolled, jaw clenched. 8 men and women sat at the long glass table, their expressions unreadable. One of the senior partners, Gregory Harlan, cleared his throat. "Vincent, we need to discuss the optics of the situation. Is this about the photo? It's not just a photo. It's become a conversation. Online. In our investor groups. We have a diversity campaign launching next quarter. The timing is fine." Gregory sighed. "Let's be honest. You hired a live-in caregiver. She's black. She's not certified. And now the media is framing it like you're blurring professional lines." Vincent's voice was sharp. "She's saving my family." "That may be true, but you have to think of perception. The world doesn't like to see too much crossing of boundaries." "You mean racial boundaries?" Gregory shifted. "I mean class, status, appearances." Vincent stood. "I won't apologize for the person who got my children to smile again. If you think a photo is going to derail our credibility, then maybe the problem isn't the photo." Silence followed, not agreement, but enough discomfort that no one spoke again. That evening, Clara stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup. She moved slowly. Her energy was low, her usual warmth muted. Ariel sat at the kitchen island drawing, while Asher stacked crackers into a tower. Neither child noticed the tension in the air, but Vincent did when he walked in and saw Clara's shoulders hunched tighter than usual. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his jacket and handed it to her. She opened it, and her breath caught. It was her letter of resignation. She had written it last night. Before she could speak, Vincent ripped it in two. "You don't quit, not for them." Her eyes filled. "I just didn't want to bring more trouble." "You brought light. Don't confuse it." Ariel looked up. "Are you going somewhere, Miss Clara?" Clara wiped her cheek. "No, sweetheart, not yet." The girl nodded and returned to her drawing, but not before reaching across the counter and sliding a folded paper toward Clara. Inside was a crayon sketch. A stick figure Clara with a heart on her chest. Two smaller figures holding her hands. That night, Clara sat on the back porch watching the moon rise. The house was quiet. Vincent stepped out with 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I know what I'm up against. It's just, I thought maybe in this house I could escape it." Vincent sat beside her. "You did, but the world finds its way in." She smiled tired. "Then I guess we better be ready for it." He clinked his mug against hers. "We are." And from the upstairs window, 2 little faces peeked through the curtain, watching them sit side by side, unmoved, unbroken, together. The conference room on the top floor of the Dixon Infrastructure headquarters had never felt so silent. Dozens of reporters sat in neat rows, some adjusting their cameras, others whispering into microphones, but the overall sound was that of held breath. Everyone in the room had read the headlines. They'd seen the blurry photograph of Clara Jones, a black woman in a modest blouse, her arms wrapped around little Asher Dixon, who had clearly been crying. The image had been circulated endlessly, each outlet spinning it with a slightly different tone, from scandal to sentiment, from judgment to intrigue. Vincent Dixon stood behind the podium, no microphone in sight, his hands resting calmly on the edge of the dark wooden lectern. He didn't need amplification. The weight of his presence was enough. He was dressed simply today, a dark charcoal suit, no tie sleeves rolled to the forearms. His jaw was tense, but his eyes were steady, unwavering. Behind him, the company's logo glowed softly against the glass wall that overlooked the skyline. But Vincent wasn't here to talk about quarterly earnings or infrastructure projects. He was here to talk about something far more personal. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice even. "I know there's been speculation, and I know my silence up until now has allowed that speculation to grow. But this morning, I want to make something perfectly clear." In the second row, a reporter from a major financial outlet shifted forward, pen poised. Another from a gossip blog adjusted her recorder. Vincent continued, 3 years ago, I lost my wife, and since then, I've been raising our children the best way I knew how. I've made mistakes. I've learned. And a few months ago, I met someone who changed everything." Behind the stage curtain, Clara stood with Laura, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wasn't meant to speak today. She didn't want to. But Laura had insisted she be there, not in the crowd, but close enough to hear her name defended. Vincent took a breath. Not dramatic, just steadying. "I did not hire Clara Jones because of her race. I did not bring her into my home for charity. I did not bring her in for appearances. I brought her into my home because my children needed someone who would see them for who they are. Messy, grieving, brilliant, difficult, loving. And Clara Jones saw them." Someone near the back cleared their throat, then asked not loudly, but audibly, "So what is she to you, Mr. Dixon?" Vincent didn't flinch. He looked up, scanning the crowd, then said firmly, "She is not a servant. She is not a placeholder. She is not a rumor. She is a human being. And in a time when my home was falling apart from the inside, she became the glue." There were murmurs, some nods, some pens scratched harder. Vincent's tone softened, but didn't lose its strength. "My daughter smiles in the morning now. My son no longer has nightmares. That change didn't come from me. It didn't come from therapy. It came from trust. And Clara earned that trust the hard way, by showing up every day with no promises and no guarantees. She earned it with patience, not perfection, with presence, not pity." Behind the curtain, Clara blinked hard. She hadn't expected to cry. Not here. But the words touched something deep. Something she had long thought gone. "I will not apologize for who brings peace into my household," Vincent said, "and I will not tolerate any insinuation that the color of a person's skin determines their value or their intention." A pause. Then he added, "If any of you came here hoping for scandal, I'm sorry. What you're witnessing isn't scandal, it's restoration." The room stayed silent for a beat longer than expected. Then slowly, a few people began to clap. Not all, not even most, but enough to let the air change. At that moment, Ariel Dixon pushed past the side curtain, a bracelet clutched tightly in her hand. She walked across the back of the stage, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the gasps, and walked right up to Clara. "This is for you," she said softly, slipping the thin, colorful bracelet over Clara's wrist. "You're the light in our house." Clara looked down at the bracelet, then at the girl. She wanted to kneel to hug her, but instead she just smiled wide and full. "Thank you, baby," she whispered. From across the stage, Vincent saw them. For a moment, the cameras didn't matter. The shareholders didn't matter. All that mattered was that something good had been said, finally, in the open, without shame, or code switching, or apology. The press conference continued with questions about company growth, diversity policies, and shareholder expectations. Vincent answered politely, professionally, but his mind kept circling back to Clara and the look on her face when Ariel gave her that bracelet. A look that said she wasn't invisible anymore. Later, as the building emptied and the floors returned to the quiet hum of normal business, Vincent found Clara sitting alone in a corner of the executive lounge. Her fingers played with the bracelet, twisting it gently. He walked over, not rushed, just sure. "You didn't have to stand there," he said, voice low. "But I'm glad you did." Clara looked up. Her eyes were tired, but not weary. "I didn't stand for them," she said. "I stood for your kids. And for me." Vincent nodded slowly, then sat beside her. Neither said much after that. They didn't need to. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fanfare or courtroom drama. Sometimes it comes with a child's bracelet, a tired woman's silent tears, and a man finally using his voice for more than business. That day, something shifted in the Dixon household, not in structure, not in routine, but in truth. And truth once spoken aloud has a way of lingering, of settling into the walls, of refusing to be ignored again. That day, Clara was no longer just the woman who showed up. She was the woman who stayed and was seen. It was late December, and the sky hung low with clouds like a ceiling waiting to collapse. Snow clung to every rooftop in Clara's old neighborhood, blanketing lawns and sidewalks in a silence too clean to last. Her breath fogged the inside of her scarf as she walked up the worn path to the porch of the house she'd once called home. In her hands, wrapped in a towel to preserve the warmth, was a pot of oxtail soup she'd started preparing at dawn, the same recipe Darren used to request on his birthday. She wasn't here for apologies. She wasn't here to reopen old wounds. Just a gesture, a simple bowl of hot soup on a cold day. She paused at the door, staring at the familiar chipped wood, the crooked welcome mat, and the doorbell that stuck if you pressed too hard. Her gloved hand trembled slightly before she reached out. The knock echoed in her chest more than it did through the house. She heard footsteps. Then the door creaked open. Darren stood in the doorway, dressed in a cashmere sweater, freshly shaved, looking healthier than he had in years. For a moment he blinked at her like she was a memory he hadn't meant to summon. "Clara," he said flatly. She held up the towel-wrapped pot. "I made soup. Thought maybe it could be something warm for the house." Before he could reply, a woman appeared behind him, young, polished skin, pale eyes, scanning Clara with the cool precision of someone calculating value. She placed a possessive hand on Darren's arm. Her voice was sweet but brittle. "Is this the caterer?" Darren didn't flinch. "No. This is Clara, my ex-wife." The woman blinked. "Oh, right." Clara didn't wait for the awkward silence to settle. She extended the pot toward Darren. "You can keep the dish. Just wanted to drop this off." Darren hesitated. The woman didn't. She reached forward and grabbed the pot with both hands, then immediately made a face. "It's leaking!" She stepped back and dropped it. The pot hit the tile of the entryway and burst open soup spilling across the floor, oxtail and carrots and bone marrow sliding toward the hallway rug. The smell of pepper and thyme rose like smoke. Clara didn't speak. Her throat tightened, but her eyes stayed dry. Darren bent slightly, then stood back up, as if helping clean it would betray something. "I think it's better if you don't come around anymore," he said, his voice low. Clara nodded. "I figured." Then came another voice, from deeper inside the house. "Who is it, Darren?" It was Irene. The mother-in-law Clara had never pleased, no matter how many Sundays she spent at church, no matter how many meals she cooked. She appeared in the doorway, her long housecoat dragging on the tile. She saw Clara and her face curdled. "Lord have mercy, what are you doing here?" Clara didn't move. She was still standing outside her boots, melting a tiny patch of snow on the mat. "Just drop something off," she said. Irene sniffed. Her eyes flicked to the broken pot, then to the young woman, now wiping her hands with a paper towel. "If I were you," Irene said loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "I'd stop pretending to be family. You left, and even when you were here, you didn't give this house what it needed." Clara felt something inside her twist, sharp and slow. She bit the inside of her cheek. "That house never felt like mine," she said quietly. "No matter what I gave." Irene crossed her arms. "Because a woman who can't carry her husband's name in blood isn't a wife. She's just visiting." Clara stepped back. The cold bit at her ears, her fingertips. She nodded once, not in agreement, but in finality. "Goodbye, Miss Irene." She turned, stepping over the soup back into the snow. No one followed. No one called her back. The wind whipped harder on her walk to the bus stop, cutting through her coat, but she didn't quicken her pace. She carried nothing now. No pot, no guilt, no illusion. Only a cardboard box she retrieved from the front stoop on her way out. Someone had left it there without a word. Inside were the fragments of her life. In that house, a photo of her in a blazer, accepting an award, a yellowed envelope with her maiden name written in cursive, a half-empty bottle of perfume she hadn't worn since the divorce. She sat at the bus stop, the box in her lap, and exhaled slowly. Not from exhaustion, but from clarity. She had needed this. Needed to see for herself that there was nothing left behind her worth reaching for. Her phone buzzed. A message from Laura. "Vincent asked if you're okay. He said the kids want to bake cookies with you tomorrow." Ariel picked the recipe. Clara looked up at the sky, gray and thick. The first snowflake landed on the back of her glove. She smiled. She didn't have a family in that house anymore, but maybe she was building a new one somewhere else. And this time she wouldn't be just a guest. It was just past 8 in the morning when Clara Jones opened the front door of her small rental home to find 2 children standing on her porch, one tall for her age, with a navy backpack that had clearly been packed with determination and snacks, and the other smaller holding a crumpled paper in one hand and a single flower in the other. Ariel and Asher Dixon. No parents, no driver, no nanny watching from the sidewalk. Just them. Just those 2 familiar faces staring up at her like she was the final page in a story they didn't want to end. Ariel was the first to speak. Her voice was steady, but her lip trembled slightly the way it always did when she was working too hard to act brave. "We came to find you." Clara blinked. The morning sun was still low, casting long shadows across the porch floor. She hadn't even finished tying her headscarf, and the smell of oatmeal lingered in the air from her half-eaten breakfast inside. "Does your father know you're here?" she asked carefully, her voice warm but cautious. "We left a note," Asher offered quickly, holding up the wrinkled piece of paper. "It says, 'Gone to get our mom back.'" Ariel wrote it. Clara crouched down to their level, her knees aching from the cold, but her heart already softening at the sight of them. She took the note, unfolded it gently, and read the childlike scrawl. It was simple, direct, spelled almost entirely right. She looked back at Ariel, whose chin was lifted in quiet defiance, and then at Asher, who now looked a little nervous, but not ready to turn around. "You walked here?" she asked. "From your house?" Ariel nodded once. "It took forever. But we followed the bus stops and then walked the rest. We asked a lady for directions when we got close. She let us use her phone to look up your address." Clara's eyes fluttered shut for a second. She inhaled deeply, steadying her breath. She knew this wasn't just some childish rebellion. This wasn't about waffles or bedtime or missing game nights. This was something deeper, a need, a decision, a message. Ariel stepped forward and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a bracelet Clara had once fixed for her, a string of small wooden beads and elastic thread. "I want you to have this," Ariel said. "I know it's silly, but I want you to know you're still our family, even if you don't live with us anymore." Clara's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. She reached out gently, taking the bracelet, and wrapped it around her wrist like it was made of gold. "You didn't have to come all this way," she whispered, "but I'm glad you did." Before she could say anything else, there was a sudden voice behind them, rushed out of breath, slightly panicked. Ariel Asher. Vincent's voice echoed from the sidewalk as he came jogging up his tie, askew jacket open, and phone clutched in one hand like a lifeline. He looked half relieved and half devastated, the way a father does when he finds his children safe, but knows he's the reason they ran in the first place. He froze when he saw Clara. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. Neither of them smiled. It had only been 10 days since she'd left, but it felt like months. Clara rose slowly, standing between the children and the man they both belonged to, not as a shield, but as something firmer, something irreplaceable. Vincent approached carefully, as if afraid he might scare them all off. "They were gone when I woke up," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just a note on the table and a house too quiet." He looked at Ariel, then Asher. "You scared me." Ariel didn't respond. Asher looked at the ground. Vincent's gaze shifted to Clara again. "They came to find you," he said, "because they still think of you as home." Clara's hand stayed at her sides. She didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. She wasn't angry, at least not in the shouting way, but the hurt was still there, sitting quietly in her chest like a scar that hadn't faded. "I didn't leave them," she said softly. "I left the noise, the judgment. I left because no matter how much I loved them, the world outside your door kept telling me I didn't belong inside." Vincent stepped closer. "That was never what I wanted, but it's what happened," Clara replied. "I was good enough to raise your children, but not enough to be seen as equal in your circles. I wasn't just hurt, Vincent. I was erased, smiled at in private, and questioned in public. Do you know what it feels like to be trusted in the kitchen, but doubted in the boardroom?" Vincent looked away, not because he didn't know, but because he finally did. "I was wrong," he said. "I should have spoken louder, sooner. I let their stares win. I let your silence do the heavy lifting." "And I let it break me," Clara said. "But I won't do that again. I can love them without losing myself. I can care without surrendering." There was a long pause, the kind that feels like it could tip in any direction. Then Ariel stepped between them, eyes blazing with clarity. "If she can't live with us, then we want to live with her." The words hit like a drumbeat in Vincent's chest. He exhaled slowly, deeply. "I don't want it to be either or," he said. "Clara, if you'll let us, we'd like to offer something different this time. Not as help, not as a favor, but as family." Clara shook her head gently but firmly. "I'm not going back as a replacement, not as the help. If I'm in your lives, it's because I belong there, not because I fill a gap." Vincent nodded. "Then come back as yourself. Come back with your own keys, your own name on the door, your own space. Not as a stand-in, as someone who matters." There was a silence then, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence where hearts speak louder than words. Clara looked at the kids, at their tired shoes and hopeful faces. She looked at Vincent, not perfect, not polished, but real. Finally, she said, "I'll be in your lives, but not to be rescued, and not to rescue you either. I'll be part of your circle, not the edge of it." "We'll make a new one," Ariel said. "No edges, no colors," Asher added, "just people." Clara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. She opened the door wider. "Well then," she said, "come inside. You've been out in the cold long enough." That afternoon they stayed, not as guests, not as invaders, but as a strange, beautiful patchwork of what a modern family could look like. Clara didn't unpack her bags. She didn't promise forever, but she let them sit at her table. She let them stay for tea and toast and long, winding conversations about anything and everything. That night, when Vincent texted her from home, he said only one thing: "Thank you for opening your door. I hope one day we deserve it." And Clara wrote back, "Doors don't stay closed forever. Sometimes they just need someone to knock for the right reasons." That weekend, Vincent arranged for new keys to be made, not just for Clara, but for the children too. Keys to her house, keys to his, because love, when it's real, doesn't live behind one lock. It lives in the hands of those willing to turn it open. And that house, the house where Clara once cried alone, began to look less like a shelter and more like a sanctuary. One where no one asked why love looked the way it did, where no one questioned the skin that comforted, or the voice that soothed, or the hands that healed. A house where children didn't care who gave birth to them, only who showed up, who stayed, who chose them again and again without needing a title or permission. In that space, something new was born. Not a family by blood, not a family by law, but a family by decision. And that kind of family, it doesn't fade, it doesn't crack. It grows, it lasts, it heals. And on a porch in the quiet stretch of a Sunday morning, a little girl braided Clara's hair while her brother tried to teach the cat how to do tricks. And Clara laughed, not politely, not carefully, but freely, because finally, she wasn't someone's secret. She wasn't someone's help. She was someone, and she was home. It was a clear Saturday morning when the Dixon family arrived at Crest Hill Elementary for the annual community celebration. The parking lot was already full of cheerful chaos. Balloon arches bounced in the breeze booths were lined up with homemade crafts and lemonade stands, and the sound of children's laughter blended with the muffled beats of a local jazz band. Vincent wore a soft blue blazer over a casual shirt, a look that somehow made him seem less like a CEO and more like a regular dad. Clara walked beside him, dressed simply in a pale yellow blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back neatly, her presence calm and composed. Ariel clutched Clara's hand without thinking, the way a child does when they feel safe. Asher skipped ahead, holding a drawing he'd made just for his teacher. They looked like a family, and for the first time, they moved like one. Inside the auditorium where the morning program would take place, seats were filling quickly. The event was casual, but the crowd was not. Many parents here were influential, partners from law firms, real estate developers, a senator's wife in the third row. Vincent nodded to some familiar faces. Clara remained behind him with the kids, focused only on making sure Asher didn't trip over his untied shoelace. The school principal took the stage, a tall woman with kind eyes and a booming voice. She welcomed the families, introduced a few student performances, and then called up several children who had been nominated for their kindness growth or leadership. To Clara's surprise, Ariel was one of them. Ariel walked onto the stage without hesitation, chin-lifted eyes scanning the room. She took the microphone like she'd been preparing her whole life. "Hi, I'm Ariel Dixon. I want to thank my teacher and my classmates, but mostly I want to thank someone who's not just helping me with homework or brushing my hair. She's the reason I learned how to be a good listener and how not to fight every time I feel mad. Clara, if you're in the room, thank you for being the heart in our house." There was a hush. Clara, standing near the side wall, blinked. Her eyes glistened. She did not move, but Ariel saw her and smiled. The applause was warm, genuine, but not everyone clapped. From the second row, a woman in a cream pantsuit leaned toward her friend and whispered a little too loudly, "That must be the housekeeper." Strange how personal help these days becomes part of the family. Her friend chuckled, unimpressed. "Well, when you're a single dad with too much money and not enough boundaries, you get sentiment." Clara heard it. She didn't flinch. Not right away. But Vincent did. He turned his head slowly, his jaw tight. His eyes locked on the woman who froze as she realized he had heard. He rose from his seat. Then he walked straight to the principal and asked for the mic. The room turned quiet again as he stepped onto the stage, not as a CEO, not even as a father first, but as a man who had watched someone earn respect and be denied it, simply because of who she was. "Good morning," he said, his voice clear, steady. "My daughter spoke more truth in 2 minutes than I have in 2 years. I want to add something. Clara Jones is not our housekeeper. She's not a background character in our home. She's a woman who walked into our lives when we were falling apart and reminded us what stability feels like. She has done more to restore laughter and hope in our household than any therapist, tutor, or program ever could. She's not help. She's the reason we are a family again." The room didn't move. Not even the kids squirmed. "You may not understand that." Vincent continued, his eyes moving across the front rows, "because you're used to putting people in boxes based on what they look like, where they come from, how much they make. But I stopped doing that the day I saw my children smile again genuinely after months of barely speaking. Clara didn't save us with pity. She saved us with presence. And anyone who has the privilege to know her should count themselves lucky." He handed back the mic, nodded once, and walked off the stage. He did not sit back down. He walked straight to Clara, who had not moved her hand, now gently clutching the edge of a nearby table. Her breathing was shallow. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I did," he replied, "because I should have done it sooner." After the event, there were polite hellos, awkward stares, some unexpected handshakes. One teacher asked Clara if she would consider helping organize a new emotional learning program. Another parent simply nodded to her as they passed by, a silent acknowledgement. But it was the kids who made the biggest statement. Later that afternoon, back at the house, Ariel came downstairs holding a shoebox wrapped in silver paper. "Open it," she told Clara without explanation. Inside was a bracelet, a simple one made from ribbon and plastic beads, but each bead spelled a word: family. "We made it last week," Ariel said. "We were waiting for the right time." Clara touched the bracelet like it was made of glass. Her fingers lingered. Her lips trembled just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, Clara sat outside on the porch as the sun dipped low. Vincent joined her holding 2 mugs of tea. The world isn't always fair, he said after a pause, but every once in a while we get to change a piece of it. Clara looked at the bracelet on her wrist. She didn't smile, not quite, but her eyes softened. Sometimes it just takes someone noticing. He nodded. I'm noticing. She took the tea, cradling it in both hands. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was borrowing space. She felt truly like she belonged. And in a city where assumptions came faster than kindness, where appearances whispered louder than truth, that belonging wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. Under the muted morning light pouring through the wide windows of the Dixon kitchen, Clara stood alone by the sink, slowly drying a coffee mug, with the kind of quiet care that only came from someone who had earned their peace the hard way. The mug had a chip on its rim, small, insignificant, yet Clara always dried around it like it mattered. The house was unusually still for a weekday. No arguing about cereal, no thudding feet down the stairs, no spilled juice or cereal box avalanches. It was calm, but not the good kind, the kind that comes before something breaks. Vincent had left for an early board meeting without his usual coffee refill and absent-minded shoulder pat to Clara. His mind was somewhere else lately, and Clara knew it, not because he said so, but because he didn't. The quiet had changed. It wasn't restful. It was heavy, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Ariel came down first, unusually dressed and unusually quiet. No tiara, no sunglasses, no dramatic entrance. Just a simple sweater jeans and that downturned look she wore only when something was bothering her. Clara offered her a smile and a plate of sliced apples, but Ariel shook her head. Not hungry, she murmured, sliding into the chair with a heaviness that didn't belong to a child. Clara sat across from her. Want to tell me why? Ariel shrugged, then looked toward the window. People at school are talking. A mom from Asher's class came to pick up her son yesterday. She saw me hugging you goodbye. She paused. Today 2 girls told me their mom said you were just a maid, that I should stop calling you our Clara like you're part of the family. Clara inhaled slowly, not shocked, not even hurt really, just tired. And how did you respond? Ariel looked down. I said they were dumb. Then I threw my lunchbox at them. It exploded everywhere. Miss Breyer called Daddy. He looked mad. Clara reached across the table, gently touched Ariel's hand. You know something, sweetheart. There are people in this world who use titles to make themselves feel bigger. Calling someone a maid like it's an insult says more about them than it ever could about me. Ariel's lips twitched. You don't mind that they said that Clara gave her hand a squeeze. Not if you don't. Asher came stumbling in just then, still in pajama pants, but with one sock halfway off, and a plastic dinosaur stuck in his hoodie pocket. He paused when he saw the serious faces, then plopped into his chair and said, I punched a kid in the arm yesterday. Clara blinked. Okay, you want to unpack that. He pulled out the dinosaur, started spinning it in his fingers. He said, you couldn't be our nanny because you don't look like the other ones. He said, real nannies are young and blonde and don't look like people who work in kitchens. Clara stood and walked over to him. She crouched to his eye level. And what do people who work in kitchens look like? Asher shrugged eyes, big, suddenly unsure. He said it like it was bad. But you make good food. You don't yell. You don't quit. You stayed. Clara smiled. That's because I care. Even when it's hard. Even when people don't understand. The boy reached forward and hugged her tightly, arms thrown around her neck, with a quiet fierceness that caught her off guard. Ariel watched, then joined them, and for a long moment they just sat like that. A tangle of arms, warmth, and something more. Later that evening, when Vincent returned, his jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed with something unsaid. Clara was organizing the bookshelf when he walked in, briefcase slung carelessly in one hand. We need to talk, he said, voice lower than usual. She nodded, stood upright, brushing her hands on her apron. Yes, we do. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The board asked me about you again. They asked why I hired someone with no childcare degree, no recent references, no optics. He didn't look at her when he said it, just stared into his glass like it held better answers. Clara crossed her arms gently. And what did you say? He met her gaze. I told them I hired the woman who made my kids feel safe for the first time in 3 years. The woman who taught them boundaries without fear, who got Ariel to stop biting her nails and Asher to sleep through the night. She nodded slowly, but the ache behind her ribs stayed. That's kind of you. "Clara, they want me to let you go." The words hit like ice water. He looked at her fully now, guilt bleeding into every line of his face. Not because of performance, because of image, because this world still judges who belongs in what spaces. They think a black woman in this house is a political statement, that I'm being reckless. Clara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. And what do you think? He didn't answer immediately. He put the glass down, walked to the window, stared at his reflection against the night. "I think I can't lose you, and not because I can't cook, but because my kids have never been better, because this house finally feels like a home again." Clara stepped closer. Her voice was calm but firm. "Then don't lose me. Don't let them dictate your household with their prejudice. Stand up for what you know is right." He turned, met her eyes. "I'm trying, but this could cost me more than just board approval. We're on the edge of a major expansion deal. One wrong move and they could vote me out." She took a breath. "Then you have to decide what matters more, a title or your children's peace." That night, Vincent sat in his home office with the door shut and every light off but the lamp on his desk. His phone buzzed again and again, texts from colleagues, emails from PR advisors, warnings veiled in politeness. Clara was trending in whispers. Some parent at school had written a Facebook post painting the scene with bias wrapped in sugar. "So sweet that the Dixon children have someone to care for them. But we must ask if it's appropriate to blur the lines between help and family." He closed the laptop, picked up a photo of his wife, Rachel. She had always believed in fighting for what was right, not just what was easy. Her eyes stared back at him, frozen in a laugh that never faded. He whispered aloud, "What would you do?" The next morning, Vincent walked into the kitchen in a crisp navy suit and stood behind Clara as she washed dishes. "Call a press conference," he said. She turned confused. "What a small one. A statement. My terms. My words." He straightened his cuffs. "It's time I say exactly who you are in this house. Not just the help, not just background, but the woman who held this family together when I couldn't." Clara blinked, heart pounding. "Vincent, are you sure I have to be? For them? For you? For me?" That Friday, in front of a modest group of reporters, and with Ariel and Asher sitting quietly in the front row, Vincent stood at a podium and began to speak. Not with spin, not with gloss, but with clarity. He introduced Clara by name, detailed her impact, not just as a caregiver, but as a stabilizer, an educator, a protector. He named the hypocrisy of standards that celebrated polished diversity in brochures, but questioned it at home. He ended with this: "My children know the difference between someone who clocks in and someone who shows up. They know the shape of loyalty, of grace, of love that isn't bound by job titles. Clara Jones isn't just our nanny. She's our family. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe they need to question what comfort really costs." That speech would ripple through the weekend. Some donors pulled back. Some parents whispered louder. But others, many more, sent letters, emails, gifts, words of thanks from people who had felt invisible in polished homes. And Clara quietly kept showing up each day with clean clothes, soft words, and the kind of courage that doesn't need applause to matter. She wasn't there for headlines. She was there for Ariel, for Asher, and maybe a little bit for herself. And at last, for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Thank you for staying with us until the very last word. If you're still here, it means something in this story spoke to your heart. Maybe it was the quiet resilience of Clara, the messy courage of Vincent, or the small, tender triumphs of two children learning how to trust again. We told this story with love, not perfection, with memory, not spectacle. And if even for a moment it reminded you of hope or dignity or the quiet power of being seen and not judged, then maybe you know why we had to tell it. We'd love to know. Where in the world are you listening from? What did this story stir in you? Was it compassion, justice? Healing? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Your voice matters here more than you know. And if this story has earned it, we hope you'll be with us for the next chapter. Until then, hold on to the people who see your worth, even when the world looks the other way.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.